She had 8 children, 1 backpack, and no place left to go. Then, in the middle of the night, she saw it, a building with her family's name still carved above the door. Inside, she didn't just find shelter, she found a secret that would tear open her family's past, test her faith, and change her destiny forever. Fired and homeless, a single mom of 8 found an abandoned building. What happened next shocked. The hum of the office printer was the last normal sound Teyana Hensley would hear before her world collapsed. Rain hammered against the windows as she stood frozen at her desk, the termination letter trembling between her fingers, the words, effective immediately, burning into her vision like acid. Her supervisor hovered nearby, already holding out his hand for her badge. "We're downsizing. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." 8 children waited for her at home. 8 hungry mouths that depended on the paycheck that would no longer come. The oldest, Malik, had texted this morning about needing new shoes for school. The twins needed their asthma medication refilled. The baby was outgrowing everything. Teyana's throat tightened as she glanced at the family photo on her desk. 8 beautiful faces smiling back at her, some brown-skinned, some lighter, all depending on her. Only her. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. 3 years, Teyana whispered, unclipping her badge with trembling fingers. 3 years without missing a single day. Her supervisor couldn't meet her eyes. Corporate decision. You have 20 minutes to collect your things. Around her, co-workers pretended not to watch. Some suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Others whispered behind cupped hands, their eyes darting toward her then away. The security guard was already waiting by the elevator. Like she was dangerous. Like she was a criminal instead of a mother who'd just lost everything. Teyana placed her personal items in a small cardboard box, the family photo, a ceramic mug her oldest had painted, a half-empty bottle of aspirin. 3 years reduced to objects that fit in 2 hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord, final notice, rent due by 5 p.m. today or eviction proceedings begin tomorrow. The walls of the office seemed to close in. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The rent was already 2 weeks late. The electricity bill was unpaid. The refrigerator at home was nearly empty. Your final paycheck will be processed next Friday, the HR representative said without looking up from her clipboard. Sign here acknowledging receipt of your termination. With numb fingers, Teyana signed away her family's security, their home, their future, all with a single pen stroke. In the elevator, the security guard stared at the changing floor numbers. Sorry about this, he muttered. Happened to my sister last month too. Teyana clutched her box tighter. Her mind raced with desperate calculations, how many meals left in the pantry, how many dollars in her nearly empty bank account, how many days until they'd be on the street. Outside, the rain fell in sheets. Of course it would rain today. Teyana stood under the building's overhang, watching people rush past with umbrellas and raincoats, heading to jobs they still had. Her phone buzzed again. Malik, bus broke down. Can you pick us up from school? The city bus she normally took home wouldn't go near their school. She'd need a taxi she couldn't afford. The rain fell harder. Teyana stepped into it, letting it soak through her clothes, mix with the tears she could no longer hold back. Her children were waiting. 8 pairs of eyes would look to her for answers tonight. 8 trusting faces would believe whatever she told them. What could she possibly say? How would she explain that tomorrow, they might not have a home? Teyana stood motionless at the bus stop, rain streaming down her face, the termination letter dissolving in her clenched fist. The bus she normally took home had just pulled away without her, another small cruelty in a day overflowing with them. 2 miles to walk in the downpour. 2 miles to figure out how to tell 8 children that their world was about to collapse. She began walking, each step heavier than the last. The small box of belongings from her desk grew waterlogged against her chest, the cardboard softening, threatening to spill her pitiful collection of memories onto the flooded sidewalk. 3 years ago, when Tyrell disappeared without warning, leaving nothing but a note saying, "I can't do this anymore," she'd sworn she wouldn't break. Even as bill collectors called, as the children cried for their father, as neighbors whispered about the woman suddenly alone with 8 children, she'd remained standing. 1 foot in front of the other, Teyana whispered to herself now, the same words she'd repeated like a prayer back then. The rain masked her tears from strangers passing by. A blessing. She couldn't afford to be seen as broken. Not now. Not ever. A car splashed through a puddle, soaking her already drenched clothes. The driver didn't slow down, didn't look back. Just another invisible woman on the side of the road, unworthy of notice or concern. Have you ever felt invisible when you needed to be seen the most? Teyana kept walking. Her mind raced with desperate calculations. The rent was 2 weeks overdue. The electricity bill unpaid. The refrigerator nearly empty. Her bank account held less than $30, not enough for even one night in a motel. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Teyana flinched but didn't stop moving. The world could collapse around her, and she would keep walking. She had no choice. A memory surfaced, Malik's 10th birthday last year, when she'd worked double shifts for weeks to afford the bike he wanted. The joy on his face had been worth every exhausted moment. What would his face look like tonight when she told him they might be sleeping in a shelter tomorrow? "They can't see me cry," she told herself firmly, straightening her shoulders despite the weight of the world upon them. "They need to believe we'll be okay." Would they be okay? Teyana honestly didn't know. But her children would never doubt it. Not from her face, not from her voice, not from her actions. The rain began to ease as she turned onto her street. The apartment complex loomed ahead, a run-down collection of units housing families one paycheck away from homelessness. Now, her family had crossed that line. She paused at the corner, setting down her box to wipe her face, to practice her smile, to prepare the lies she would tell. "It's just temporary. We'll figure something out. Everything happens for a reason." As she reached for her box, a flash of white caught her eye. Something taped to the front door of their unit, visible even from this distance. Teyana's heart stopped. The eviction notice. It wasn't just a threat anymore. She forced herself forward, legs trembling with each step. The paper fluttered in the wind, taunting her. Up close, the bold red letters were unmistakable, "Notice to vacate." Below it, the deadbolt had been changed. Her key wouldn't work. Her children's belongings were locked inside. Their home was no longer theirs. And in exactly 17 minutes, the school bus would arrive at the corner, carrying 8 children who had no idea they were now homeless. Teyana hid the eviction notice in her soaked purse and wiped her tears just as the yellow school bus rounded the corner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 8 children were about to step off that bus expecting dinner, homework help, and the safety of their home, all things she could no longer provide. The bus doors opened with a hiss that sounded like an accusation. First came the twins, Jaden and Jayla, 10 years old with matching dimples and opposite personalities. Jaden, serious and protective, immediately noticed his mother's red eyes. Jayla, sunshine in human form, skipped forward, oblivious to the disaster awaiting them. "Mom! I got a gold star in math." Jayla thrust a paper toward Teyana's trembling hands. "That's wonderful, baby," Teyana managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Next came Zion, 12 and already showing signs of the man he would become, shoulders squared against the world. Behind him, Shyamara, 11, clutching her library book like a shield. Have you ever had to smile when your heart was breaking? When was the moment you realized parents hide their pain to protect their children? Malik, the oldest at 14, stepped off last, carrying 3-year-old Imani on his hip and holding 6-year-old Kenya's hand. 7-year-old Darius trailed behind, lost in his own imagination as always. The baby was fussy at daycare, Malik explained, transferring Imani to Teyana's arms. Miss Johnson said she might be getting sick. Imani buried her face in her mother's neck, hot skin confirming a fever. Another problem. Another expense. Another impossible thing. Mom. Zion's voice cut through Teyana's panic. Why are you all wet? And why are we standing out here instead of going inside? 8 pairs of eyes turned to her, waiting for an explanation. 8 trusting faces, each a different shade of brown, each carrying pieces of their father, their grandparents, their ancestors, and all of them looking to her for safety. Well, Teyana began, forcing brightness into her voice, I have a surprise for you all. A surprise? Kenya's eyes widened with excitement. Always the optimist, always first to believe in magic. Yes, Teyana continued, the lie forming as she spoke. We're going on an adventure. What kind of adventure? Darius asked, suddenly interested. His imagination was both his refuge and his gift. Teyana knelt down, gathering her youngest children close. We're going to stay somewhere new for a little while. Like camping, but inside. Are we moving? Amara asked quietly, worry creasing her forehead. She noticed everything, felt everything, carried burdens too heavy for her small shoulders. Just for a little bit, Teyana assured her. It'll be fun. Malik's eyes narrowed. At 14, he was too perceptive to be fooled completely. Mom, what's going on? I'll explain everything later, she whispered to him. Right now, I need your help. Please. Something in her voice must have conveyed the desperation she was fighting to hide. Malik nodded once, then turned to his siblings with a forced smile of his own. Hey, who wants to play I Spy while Mom figures out our transportation? As the younger children gathered around Malik, Teyana turned away, pretending to make a call. Her phone was nearly dead, and there was no one to call anyway. No family. No friends with space for 9 people. No money for even one night in a motel. Mommy, Imani whimpered, her small body burning with fever. I don't feel good. I know, baby, Teyana soothed, kissing her forehead. Mommy's going to make it all better. But as the rain began to fall again and darkness approached, Teyana faced the truth she couldn't share. For the first time in her children's lives, she had no idea how to protect them from the night ahead. Then Zion pointed across the street. Hey, what's that building over there? The one with our name on it? Hensley. Teyana whispered, squinting through the rain at the faded sign Zion had spotted. That can't be. But there it was, barely visible on the abandoned brick building across the street, Hensley Community Resource Center. The same name she carried, the same name her children bore. Before she could process this strange coincidence, Kenya tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, I'm cold. Can we go home now? Yeah, I need to change, Jaden added, his school uniform soaked from the rain. Teyana's fabricated adventure story was already unraveling. Malik gave her a knowing look, silently asking for direction. Let's go check if we can get inside the apartment, she finally said, leading her shivering children toward their home of 3 years. Have you ever had to face a truth you weren't ready for your children to know? The moment when innocence collides with harsh reality. At their door, Teyana pretended to search for her keys, knowing they would never work again. The younger children waited patiently, but Amara's observant eyes fixed on the white notice still partially visible in her mother's purse. Mom, she said quietly, what's that paper? Before Teyana could answer, Malik stepped forward and tried the door himself. It didn't budge. He examined the lock, then turned to his mother with eyes suddenly much older than 14. They changed the locks, he stated flatly. Why did they change the locks, Mom? The younger children fell silent, confusion giving way to the first tremors of fear. What does that mean? Zion demanded. Why can't we go inside? Teyana took a deep breath. The lie had reached its limit. The landlord, we can't stay here anymore. But our stuff is in there. Jayla cried, pressing her face against the window. My teddy bear is in there. Darius began to cry silently, tears streaming down his face. My action figures, my books. Kenya wrapped her arms around Teyana's legs. I don't understand, Mommy. Where will we sleep? Imani's fever-hot face pressed against Teyana's neck, her small body racked with shivers. The reality of their situation crashed down with the force of a tidal wave. 8 children. Night approaching. Nowhere to go. I lost my job today, Teyana finally admitted, her voice breaking. And we're behind on rent. The landlord, he locked us out. The words hung in the rain-soaked air like a physical presence. So we're homeless? Zion asked bluntly. Homeless. The word Teyana couldn't bring herself to say aloud now echoed between them. No, she said firmly, though her certainty was a shell with nothing inside. We're not homeless. We're just, between homes right now. Where will we sleep tonight? Amara asked, her quiet voice cutting through Teyana's fragile defenses. The question every mother dreads. The question no mother should have to face. I don't know, Teyana whispered, the truth finally breaking through. I don't know. Malik stepped forward, putting his arm around his mother's shoulders. We'll figure it out together. The simple gesture, her child comforting her, nearly broke Teyana completely. She should be protecting them, not the other way around. Night was falling fast. The temperature dropping. The rain showing no signs of stopping. 8 children looked to her for salvation she couldn't provide. Then Darius, the dreamer, the one who saw magic where others saw nothing, pointed across the street. What about that building? The one with our name on it? Maybe it's meant for us. A desperate idea formed in Teyana's mind. A dangerous idea. An illegal idea. Sometimes, she heard herself saying, home finds us when we need it most. As they crossed the street toward the abandoned building, a shadow moved behind one of the broken windows. They weren't alone. Teyana froze mid-step, pulling her children back from the abandoned building. I saw something move in there, she whispered, heart thundering against her ribs. Maybe it's just the wind, Malik suggested, but his voice held no conviction. The shadow disappeared. No further movement followed. Just the rain, the darkness, and 9 people with nowhere else to go. We can't stay here, Teyana decided suddenly, urging her children away from the building. It's not safe. 4 hours later, they huddled beneath the narrow awning of a closed convenience store, the last in a string of temporary shelters they tried and abandoned. The bus station had closed at 9. The park benches were too exposed to the relentless rain. The hospital waiting room had seemed promising until security began eyeing their large group suspiciously. What would you do if you saw a family with nowhere to go tonight? Would you look away or reach out a hand? I'm hungry, Kenya whimpered, curled against Teyana's side. Imani had finally fallen into a fitful sleep, her fever raging. The twins sat back to back, propping each other up. Darius had stopped talking entirely, a silence more worrying than tears. Try to sleep, Teyana urged, though sleep seemed impossible on the hard concrete, with the wind driving rain beneath their inadequate shelter. We could try a shelter, Malik suggested for the 3rd time. They're full, Teyana repeated, having called everyone in the city. And they'd separate us. Boys and girls. You in one place, me in another with the little ones. The thought of her children split apart was the final line she refused to cross. They'd already lost their father, their home, their possessions. They wouldn't lose each other. I'm sorry, she whispered, her words nearly lost in the storm. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this. Zion, alert despite the late hour, shook his head fiercely. This isn't your fault, Mom. But it felt like her fault. Every shiver from her children, every hungry stomach, every fear in their eyes, all of it weight pressing down on her shoulders until she could barely breathe. "Please," Teyana prayed silently, eyes closed against the darkness. "If you're listening, we need help. My babies need shelter. Just for tonight. Please." As if in answer, the rain suddenly intensified, a torrent that breached their meager shelter entirely. Imani woke with a cry. Kenya began to sob. "We have to move," Teyana said, gathering her youngest into her arms. "Now." They stumbled through flooded streets, the children holding hands in a chain behind her. Their shoes, soaked through, squelched with every step. Their clothes clung to shivering bodies. "There's nowhere else to try," Malik said, voice breaking with exhaustion and defeat. Teyana stopped walking. The truth crashed down like the rain around them, they had reached the end of options. Of hope. "The building," she said finally. "The one with our name. We're going back." "But you said," Amara began. "I know what I said," Teyana cut her off. "But we have no choice now." They retraced their steps through the deserted streets, back to the abandoned brick structure that had called to them hours before. Up close, it looked both more forbidding and more promising, broken windows like dark eyes, but solid walls that would block the rain. "What if someone's in there?" Jayla asked, voicing the fear they all shared. "Then we'll leave," Teyana promised, though where they would go remained unanswered. She approached the boarded front door, tugging experimentally at the weathered planks. To her surprise, one shifted easily, revealing a gap just wide enough for them to slip through one by one. "It's like it was waiting for us," Darius whispered, speaking for the first time in hours. As they squeezed through the opening, a sound echoed from deep within the building, not the wind, not the rain, but footsteps approaching in the darkness. The footsteps stopped. Silence fell over the darkness, broken only by the children's frightened breathing. "Hello." Teyana called out, positioning herself in front of her children. "We don't mean any harm. We just need shelter from the storm." No answer came. The darkness remained still, watching. Malik pulled out his phone, activating the flashlight. The weak beam cut through the gloom, revealing a vast, empty entryway. Dust particles danced in the light. No person stood waiting, only shadows playing tricks on their fear-heightened senses. "Look," Amara whispered, pointing to the wall. The flashlight beam revealed a large bronze plaque, tarnished with age but still legible. Hensley Community Resource Center, where no family stands alone, established 1973. Teyana moved closer, hand trembling as she traced the raised letters of her own surname. Have you ever felt a moment when coincidence seems too perfect to be random? When the universe conspires to place you exactly where you need to be? "It's our name," Kenya said with childlike wonder. "Did you build this, Mommy?" "No, baby," Teyana answered, unable to explain the goosebumps rising on her arms. "But it feels like it was waiting for us." The children spread out cautiously, Malik's phone light revealing more of their surroundings. The building had clearly been abandoned for years. Dust coated everything. Water damage stained the ceiling. Yet beneath the decay lay hints of what had once been, a reception desk, faded murals on the walls, doors leading to numerous rooms. "It's so big," Jaden whispered, his voice echoing slightly. Jayla, normally inseparable from her twin, wandered a few steps away. "This could be our castle," she said, childhood imagination transforming the derelict space. Darius nodded enthusiastically. A secret hideout. Even Zion, who'd been silent and angry since the eviction, seemed captivated by the building. "At least it's dry," he conceded, which from him counted as enthusiasm. Teyana felt something shift inside her, the first easing of the desperate panic that had gripped her all day. They weren't safe, not truly. They were trespassing in an abandoned building that might be structurally unsound. But they had walls around them. A roof over their heads. Shelter from the storm. What does that say? Amara asked, pointing to smaller text beneath the plaque. Malik directed his light closer. Founded by Margaret Hensley to serve mothers and children in crisis, he read aloud. No woman with children shall be turned away. Teyana's breath caught. Her grandmother's name had been Margaret. She died before Teyana was born, but her father had spoken of her with reverence, a formidable woman who'd raised 6 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam. Mom. Malik's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You okay? My grandmother's name was Margaret, she said softly. Margaret Hensley. The children fell silent, the coincidence too strange to be dismissed. Maybe it's a sign, Kenya suggested. Maybe she led us here. Maybe, Teyana agreed, unable to explain the sensation washing over her, like hands gently guiding her shoulders, like coming home after a long journey. They moved deeper into the building, finding a large open room that might once have been a dining area or gathering space. The windows, though broken in places, were high enough to keep out the worst of the rain. We can stay here tonight, Teyana decided. Just until morning. Then we'll figure something out. As the children settled onto the dusty floor, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, Teyana noticed something gleaming on the wall opposite. Leaving the children huddled together, she crossed the room and brushed away years of dust. Beneath was a framed photograph, faded but clear enough to make out a woman standing proudly before the newly opened center. A woman with Teyana's eyes, Malik's chin, and Kenya's smile. A woman wearing a nameplate that read, Margaret Hensley, Director. Teyana's hands trembled as she touched the photograph of Margaret Hensley, a woman she'd never met but whose blood ran through her veins. The same blood that ran through her children's veins. The same name displayed proudly above the entrance. Mom. Malik's voice pulled her back. I found some old blankets in a closet. They smell musty, but they're dry. She turned from the photograph, tucking the revelation away to examine later. Her children needed her now. The blankets were threadbare but better than nothing. Teyana shook each one thoroughly, checking for mold or insects before allowing her children to use them. They arranged themselves in the center of the large room, furthest from the broken windows where occasional raindrops still found their way inside. What if someone comes? Amara asked, always the worrier, always seeing the dangers others missed. Then we'll explain our situation, Teyana answered, projecting confidence she didn't feel. Breaking and entering was a crime, even if the building shared their name, even if some strange connection pulled at her heart. How many nights have you lain awake, protecting those you love while they sleep? Standing guard between them and a world that doesn't care if they survive? Kenya refused to settle, her small body rigid with tension. I want my teddy, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. I want my own bed. I know, baby, Teyana soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. Just for tonight. Pretend we're camping, like we talked about doing this summer. Some camping trip, Zion muttered, but he helped arrange the younger children in a circle, with Imani in the center where multiple bodies could keep her fever warm. Jayla began to whimper as the building creaked and groaned around them. What's that noise? Just the wind talking to the building, Darius answered before Teyana could. Old buildings like to talk at night. They're telling stories. What kind of stories? Jaden asked skeptically. About all the people who lived here before, Darius continued, his imagination spinning comfort from fear. About kids like us who needed a safe place and found it here. One by one, the children's eyelids grew heavy, their bodies surrendering to exhaustion even as their minds resisted. Kenya curled against Teyana's side. The twins huddled together as always. Zion sat with his back against a wall, determined to stay awake, but soon his chin drooped to his chest. Malik was the last to succumb, fighting sleep like an enemy. I'll stay up with you, he told Teyana, his young shoulders carrying burdens no child should bear. Sleep, she insisted. I'll wake you if I need you. Finally, he too drifted off, leaving Teyana alone with her thoughts in the darkness. She looked at her children, vulnerable in sleep. Faces relaxed, bodies curled trustingly toward each other and her. They believed, even now, that she would protect them. That tomorrow would be better. That this was just one bad night, not the beginning of a nightmare with no end. 24 hours ago, she'd been employed. They'd had a home. Food in the refrigerator. Plans for the weekend. How quickly it had all disappeared, like smoke in the wind. Tears slid silently down Teyana's cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. There was no one to see, no one to be strong for in this moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her sleeping children. "I'm so sorry I couldn't give you better than this." The building creaked again, as if in response. Teyana's gaze returned to where she knew the photograph hung, invisible now in the darkness. Margaret Hensley had built this place for mothers in crisis. For women like her. Had her grandmother somehow known? Had she created this sanctuary generations ago, anticipating that her own blood would someday need its shelter? A sound cut through her thoughts, not the building settling, not the rain outside, but the distinct click of a door opening somewhere in the darkness. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. A beam of light swept across the floor, inching closer to where her children slept. They weren't alone. Teyana lunged to her feet, positioning herself between the approaching light and her sleeping children. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor, a pitiful weapon, but the only protection she could offer. "Who's there?" she demanded, voice steady despite her fear. "We're just looking for shelter. We'll leave at dawn." The light stopped moving, hovering just beyond the doorway. A moment of silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then a voice, male, rough with age but surprisingly gentle. "Dawn's already here, ma'am." As if to confirm his words, pale light began filtering through the high windows, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind the hush that follows nature's fury. The stranger lowered his flashlight, revealing himself, an elderly man in a worn maintenance uniform, his dark face etched with deep lines of experience. He carried no weapon, no phone to call authorities, only a thermos that steamed in the cool morning air. "Name's Walter," he said simply. "Been watching over this place for 30 years. Even after they closed it down." Teyana didn't lower her makeshift weapon. "We don't want trouble." "Neither do I," Walter replied, gesturing to her sleeping children. "Looks like you folks had a rough night. Have you ever met someone who saw your desperation but offered dignity instead of judgment? How did it change the way you faced your next impossible hour?" The children began to stir, Malik the first to jump up defensively, placing himself beside his mother. The others followed, a huddle of confused, frightened faces blinking in the strengthening daylight. "I'm not here to run you off," Walter assured them, opening his thermos. "Just brought some coffee. Thought you might need it." The simple act of kindness, so unexpected after yesterday's cascade of cruelty, broke something in Teyana. The chair leg slipped from her grasp, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. Walter pretended not to notice, busying himself with pouring steaming coffee into the thermos cap. "Building's been empty 5 years now. City keeps threatening to tear it down, but paperwork's always missing or delayed. Almost like someone doesn't want it gone." He handed the coffee to Teyana, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "Bathroom still works," Walter continued casually. "Water's cold, but it runs. Kitchen sink too. Power's off though." Imani, fever slightly improved, peered at Walter from behind Teyana's legs. "Are you an angel?" she asked with childish directness. Walter laughed, a warm sound that seemed to chase away the last shadows in the room. "No, little one. Just an old man who believes in Margaret Hensley's mission." The morning continued to reveal their surroundings, a space far less threatening than it had appeared in darkness. Dust and neglect, yes, but also sturdy walls, solid floors, rooms that could offer privacy and purpose. We should clean up, Teyana decided, her voice stronger. Make this space usable for today while we figure out what's next. The children, resilient as only the young can be, quickly turned the cleanup into a game. Kenya and Darius chased dust bunnies. The twins raced to see who could fill their trash pile faster. Amara organized blankets, while Zion fixed a wobbly table with determined focus. Mom! Look what I found. Malik called from a small room off the main area. It still works. The radio he discovered was ancient, all dials and antennas, but when he turned it on, music poured forth, crackling with static but undeniably real. A song Teyana recognized from her own childhood, when life had seemed so much simpler. The younger children gathered around the miracle of sound, faces lighting up. Jayla began to dance, tugging at Kenya until she joined in. Even Zion couldn't suppress a slight bob of his head to the rhythm. Walter watched from the doorway, a small smile playing across his weathered face. For the first time since holding that termination letter, Teyana felt something other than despair. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. The music, the sunlight, the laughter of her children, they combined to crack the shell of fear around her heart. She smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. None of them noticed the man watching from across the street, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed at the unmistakable signs of life in a building marked for demolition. The sharp knock on the door came 3 days later, just as they'd settled into a fragile routine. Walter had brought them basics, a camp stove, some food, blankets from his own home. The children had claimed spaces, arranged their meager possessions, begun to relax slightly in their temporary sanctuary. Teyana was heating water for instant oatmeal when the sound echoed through the building, authoritative, unmistakable, final. The children froze. Malik immediately gathered the younger ones, herding them toward the back rooms as they'd practiced. Zion moved to stand beside his mother, refusing to hide. Stay back, she whispered to him, smoothing her wrinkled shirt before approaching the door. The man on the other side wore a city jacket and carried a clipboard. His face was neutral, professional, the face of systems and rules that had no room for human desperation. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at his paperwork, "I'm Eric Daniels from the city inspector's office. We've had reports of unauthorized occupancy in this condemned building." Teyana's mouth went dry. "We're not hurting anything," she said, blocking his view of the interior where evidence of their presence was everywhere. "Just staying temporarily until—" "You know this building's scheduled for demolition next month, right?" he interrupted, not unkindly, just stating facts. "It's been deemed structurally unsound. Not safe for occupancy." Behind her, Teyana heard a small whimper, Kenya, who'd slipped away from Malik to cling to her mother's legs. The inspector's eyes flicked down, then back to Teyana's face. Something shifted in his expression. "Have you ever stood at a crossroads where someone could either destroy your world with rules or save it with mercy? How many times have you been that person for someone else? How many of you are staying here?" he asked, his voice lower. 9, Teyana answered, chin lifting slightly. "Me and my 8 children. We were evicted. I lost my job. The shelters are full. We have nowhere else to go." He glanced at his clipboard, then passed her into the building. "No husband. He left 3 years ago." The inspector, Eric, sighed, removing his official cap to run a hand through his hair. "Ma'am, I understand your situation, but this building is genuinely unsafe. The electrical system's shot. There's water damage to the support beams. In heavy rain, the roof could collapse." "Then we'll leave during storms," Teyana countered, desperation making her bold. "Please. My children were sleeping on the street 3 nights ago." Eric looked at his clipboard again, longer this time, as if searching for something in the paperwork that might help. "The demolition permit lists this as city property," he said finally. Abandoned by the original foundation that ran it. The Hensley Foundation, Teyana supplied. My grandmother's name was Margaret Hensley. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. You're related to the founder? I think so. I never met her. But there's a photograph inside that looks like. I can't officially approve anyone living here, Eric cut in, lowering his voice further. But I'm not required to file my inspection report until the end of the week. Teyana held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid to speak. If certain maintenance issues were addressed, he continued carefully, I might need to postpone my final assessment. For safety reasons. Maintenance issues, Teyana repeated, understanding dawning. Eric nodded, handing her a folded paper from his pocket, separate from his official forms. These would need to be fixed before I could possibly consider the building even temporarily habitable. Their fingers brushed as she took the paper, and in that moment, she saw the human behind the official, a man choosing compassion over protocol, mercy over rules. I won't report you, he said softly, so only she could hear. But you need to make this place safer, especially with kids. And start looking for something permanent. This is temporary at best. Thank you, Teyana whispered, tears threatening. Thank you. Eric replaced his cap, resuming his official demeanor. I'll be back to check on those issues, Mrs. Hensley. As he turned to leave, he glanced back once. My sister was homeless with her kids last year. Nobody helped them. Nobody bent the rules. He walked away, clipboard tucked under his arm, leaving Teyana standing in the doorway with the list of maintenance issues, and the first real hope she'd felt in days. None of them noticed the man watching from a car down the street, younger, sharper, his eyes fixed on the building with an intensity that had nothing to do with city inspections. The black pickup truck pulled up outside the Hensley Center the next morning, its arrival marked by the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires. Teyana tensed, peering through a gap in the boards covering the windows. The man she'd seen watching from the car yesterday emerged, carrying not a clipboard but a toolbox and several bags. Stay back, she instructed her children, grabbing the hammer Walter had left behind, a more substantial weapon than her previous chair leg. The knock was different this time, hesitant, almost apologetic. Teyana approached cautiously, Malik and Zion flanking her despite her orders to stay hidden. Who is it? She called through the door. Eli Walker, came the reply. I work with the maintenance company that checks abandoned properties. I brought some things. To help. Teyana exchanged glances with her sons, suspicion warring with desperate need. She cracked the door open, chain still in place, hammer hidden behind her back. The man outside wasn't what she expected. Younger than Walter, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes that held their own history of pain. He wore a work jacket with Walker Maintenance embroidered on the pocket, and the bags at his feet emitted the unmistakable aroma of hot food. Eric sent me, he explained quickly. The inspector. He's my cousin. Said you might need some help with those maintenance issues. When was the last time a stranger's kindness caught you completely off guard? How did it change your view of humanity, even for a moment? Teyana hesitated, her survival instincts screaming caution while her children's needs demanded she take the risk. I brought breakfast, Eli added, gesturing to the bags. And some supplies. Tools, materials to fix the roof leak, a portable heater. Nothing fancy, just stuff from jobs we've finished. Why would you help us? Teyana asked, still not removing the chain. You don't know us. Something flickered across Eli's face, recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding. I know what it's like, he said simply. To have nowhere to go. Against her better judgment, Teyana unlatched the chain. The smell of eggs and bacon wafted through the opening, and behind her, she heard Kenya's stomach growl loudly. Eli didn't rush in. He waited to be invited, respecting the fragile sanctuary they'd created. When Teyana finally stepped back, he entered carefully, setting down his offerings like peace treaties. The children emerged slowly from their hiding places, drawn by the scent of real food, not the canned goods Walter had provided, not the crackers from school lunches they'd rationed, but hot, fresh breakfast. 8 kids? Eli asked, taking in the group with surprised eyes. Yes, Teyana answered defensively. They're all mine. Instead of judgment, his face showed something closer to admiration. You've been managing all this alone. Their father left, she said, the familiar explanation bitter on her tongue. 3 years ago. Eli nodded, unpacking containers of scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, enough to feed an army, or one very hungry family. My wife died, he offered in exchange, the words matter of fact but weighted with history. Cancer. 2 years ago. Teyana didn't know how to respond to this unexpected sharing of grief, this strange symmetry between them, both broken by loss, both rebuilding from ruins. The children approached the food cautiously, looking to their mother for permission. At her nod, they fell upon the meal with barely restrained desperation, reminding Teyana how inadequate their provisions had been. Eric showed me his list, Eli said quietly, while the children ate. I can fix most of it. Make this place safer, at least temporarily. We can't pay you, Teyana warned. I'm not asking for payment. His eyes met hers directly, honest in a way she'd forgotten existed in the world. Everyone needs help sometimes. Throughout the day, Eli worked, patching the roof, reinforcing weak spots, rigging a generator for limited electricity. The children watched him with varying degrees of trust. Kenya and Imani, too young to have learned suspicion, shadowed him openly. Darius peppered him with questions about tools and techniques. The twins kept their distance, whispering together. Amara observed silently, missing nothing. Zion maintained a protective scowl. Only Malik engaged directly, offering to help, learning as Eli taught. By afternoon, they worked side by side, passing tools without words, building something beyond just repairs. As twilight approached, Eli packed his tools, promising to return the next day. Before leaving, he handed Teyana a cell phone. It's prepaid, he explained. My number's programmed in. If you need anything. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and something electric passed between them, not romance, not yet, but connection. Recognition. Possibility. After he left, Teyana found Malik staring at the repaired roof, the functioning lights, the secured doors. Do you think we can trust him? Her son asked, suddenly sounding much older than 14. Before she could answer, Zion appeared beside them, his usual hardness softened slightly. He has the same look in his eyes that Mom does, he said. Like he knows what it's like when the world falls apart. The morning sun filtered through newly cleaned windows, casting golden light across what had once been the community center's main hall. 2 weeks had passed since Eli's first appearance, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Careful with that. Teyana called as Malik and Eli maneuvered a donated sofa through the doorway, not new, but clean and sturdy, worlds better than the floor they'd been sleeping on. What had begun as basic safety repairs had evolved into full-scale renovation. Word had spread through Eli and Walter's connections, a single mother of 8, homeless through no fault of her own, temporarily sheltering in Margaret Hensley's forgotten legacy. Help arrived in unexpected forms, a plumber fixed the bathroom, an electrician restored partial power, a church group donated furniture. Mom! Look what we found! Kenya burst through a door they'd only recently managed to unlock, dragging Jayla behind her. A whole room of toys. Teyana followed her daughters to discover what had once been a childcare area, dusty but largely intact. Wooden blocks, faded picture books, a rocking chair in the corner, treasures beyond price to children who'd left their own possessions locked behind an eviction notice. Have you ever watched something beautiful emerge from what seemed completely broken? Where do you find the strength to rebuild when everything has been lost? It's not stealing if they were going to demolish it anyway, Darius reasoned, already organizing the books by color, creating his own system in this new world they were building. Each day brought new discoveries, new improvements. The kitchen now functioned with a refrigerator Eli had salvaged from a remodeling job. A donated card table became their dining area, with mismatched chairs gathered around it like faithful subjects. The children approached the transformation with varying attitudes. Amara carefully labeled each space, creating order from chaos. Zion, his initial suspicion of Eli slowly thawing, proved surprisingly adept at electrical work, following the man's patient instructions with growing confidence. "We should name it," Imani announced one evening as they gathered for dinner, a proper meal cooked on a camping stove, served on donated plates, shared around a table that felt increasingly like home. "Name what, baby?" Teyana asked, serving mashed potatoes that a local restaurant had provided at closing time. "Our castle," Imani stated with absolute certainty. "That's what this is." Jaden rolled his eyes, but Jayla immediately brightened. "The castle." "Yes. Every royal family needs a castle." "We're not royalty," Zion muttered, though with less edge than he would have used days earlier. "We're Hensleys," Kenya countered, straightening her shoulders with surprising dignity for a 6-year-old. "And this place has our name on it. That makes us the royal family." Teyana exchanged glances with Eli, who had become a fixture at their evening meals. Something warm passed between them, not quite hope, but its quieter cousin, possibility. Later, after the children had settled in their newly designated sleeping areas, no longer huddled together on the main floor but spread across rooms they'd claimed as their own, Teyana stood in what had once been the center's office. The photograph of Margaret Hensley watched over her, eyes that matched her own seeming to approve of their presence. "Do you think we can really stay here?" she asked Eli, who was repairing a drawer in the old desk. "Legally? It's complicated," he admitted. "But practically? I think you already have." It was true. In just 2 weeks, they'd transformed not just the building but themselves. The children no longer flinched at unexpected sounds. They slept through the night. They made plans for tomorrow, next week, next month, the language of people who expected a future. Teyana herself stood straighter, smiled more readily, breathed more deeply. The constant knot of panic in her chest had loosened. She was finding her way back to herself in these reclaimed rooms, these repurposed spaces. "Sometimes," she said softly, tracing Margaret Hensley's name on the photograph, "it feels like we were meant to find this place. Like it was waiting for us." "Maybe it was," Eli replied, his hand briefly touching hers before returning to his work. "Maybe that's how family works across generations." The peace of the moment shattered with Malik's frantic appearance in the doorway, face pale with alarm. "Mom," he gasped, "there are police cars pulling up outside." The police had come for a neighboring building, a drug bust that had nothing to do with them. False alarm. But the fear that had flashed across Teyana's face, the way she'd instinctively gathered her children like a mother hen protecting her chicks, it revealed how precarious their situation remained, how quickly their fragile peace could shatter. Hours later, with the children finally asleep in their newly established bedrooms, Teyana sat with Eli on the building's flat roof. The night sky stretched above them, stars piercing through urban light pollution like distant promises. 2 folding chairs, a battery-powered lantern between them, and the quiet that only emerges after narrowly avoided disaster. "I thought we were finished," Teyana admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought they were coming to take my children." Eli nodded, understanding without need for explanation. "That fear doesn't go away easily. The feeling that everything can disappear in an instant." "You felt it too," she observed. "Not a question." When Sarah got sick, he confirmed, the name of his late wife spoken with gentle reverence. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it." Teyana remained silent, giving him space to continue or retreat. 3 months, he said finally. "From diagnosis to funeral." Not enough time to prepare, but too much time to watch her suffer. Have you ever recognized your own pain in someone else's eyes? That moment when two broken stories somehow fit together perfectly, creating something neither complete nor ruined, but honestly human. Tyrell left a note. Teyana offered in exchange, her own pain currency in this unusual transaction of truths. Said he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. 8 kids was too many. Life with me was too hard. Coward, Eli said simply, the single word carrying no judgment of her, only of the man who had walked away. I kept thinking he'd come back, she continued, surprised by her willingness to share what she'd kept buried. For the first year, I jumped every time the phone rang. Checked every unfamiliar car on the street. Rehearsed what I'd say when he finally returned. And now? Now I know some people just keep walking. They never look back. Eli's hand moved in the darkness, finding hers with uncanny precision. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. And some people find their way exactly where they need to be, he countered softly. The touch was innocent, not romantic, not explicitly intimate, yet it sent electricity coursing through Teyana's veins. How long since anyone had touched her with gentleness? How long since she'd been seen not just as a mother, a provider, a problem to solve, but as a woman? I wasn't looking for this, Eli confessed, his voice thick with something unspoken. When Eric told me about you, about the kids, I just wanted to help. I didn't expect. Neither did I, Teyana whispered, neither of them needing to define what this was, this connection, this understanding, this possibility blooming between them like a flower through concrete. Their fingers remained interlaced, neither pulling away nor moving closer. Just existing in the same space, breathing the same air, sharing the weight of past losses and tentative future hopes. Sarah would have liked you, Eli said suddenly. She always said I'd need someone strong after she was gone. Someone who understood what really matters. Do I? Teyana asked. Understand what matters? I couldn't even keep a roof over my children's heads. You kept them together, he corrected firmly. You kept them safe. You kept going when most people would have broken. That's what matters. From below came the sound of a door opening, footsteps on the stairs leading to the roof. Malik emerged from the darkness, his teenage face serious in the lantern light. Mom, he said, eyes moving between her and Eli, noting their joined hands with an expression Teyana couldn't quite read. There's something you need to see. He held out his phone, the device Eli had given them for emergencies, now displaying a news article with a headline that made Teyana's blood run cold. City approves emergency demolition of abandoned Hensley Center, clearing to begin within 48 hours. Morning arrived with the sudden roar of engines, not one vehicle but a convoy. Police cruisers, city maintenance trucks, a bulldozer on a flatbed trailer, and a sleek black sedan carrying officials in suits. They descended on the Hensley Center like an invading army, surrounding the building before most of its occupants had even awakened. Teyana jolted upright at the noise, heart hammering against her ribs. Despite the article's warning, despite Eli's frantic calls to his cousin at the inspector's office, despite their desperate preparations throughout the night, the reality of authorities at their doorstep was still a shock that stole her breath. Mom. Amara stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. There are people outside. Lots of people. Before Teyana could respond, pounding rattled the front door, not a knock but a demand. An official voice amplified by megaphone followed, attention occupants. This is the City Housing Authority. This building has been condemned and scheduled for immediate demolition. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. 30 minutes. After 3 weeks of rebuilding their lives, of creating stability from chaos, of transforming an abandoned shell into a home, they had 30 minutes. Have you ever watched everything you've rebuilt threatened with destruction again? How many times can a heart break before it loses the capacity to hope? Get your brothers and sisters, Teyana instructed Amara, fighting to keep her voice steady. Pack what you can carry. Just essentials. The children moved with the efficiency of those too familiar with emergency evacuations. Malik organized the younger ones, assigning each a backpack and specific items to gather. Even Kenya, usually bubbling with questions, worked silently, her small face grave with understanding beyond her years. Eli arrived breathless, having rushed over at first light. "They're not supposed to be here yet," he said, disbelief coloring his voice. "Eric said we had at least until tomorrow." Through a gap in the window coverings, Teyana watched men in hard hats examining the building's exterior, marking areas with spray paint, discussing demolition plans as if the structure were empty, as if 9 human lives weren't being shattered inside. "We need more time," she whispered, panic rising like floodwater in her chest. "We've nowhere to go." A sharp crack announced the posting of an official notice to their door, bright orange, the words, "Emergency Demolition," visible even from inside. Beneath it, in smaller text, "Unauthorized occupant subject to arrest for trespassing." Arrest. Her children watching their mother handcuffed, taken away. The family separated by force rather than choice. A criminal record ensuring she'd never find decent employment again. "Mom." Zion appeared at her side, voice cracking with emotion he usually kept buried. "Are we going to lose the castle?" Before she could answer, Jayla began to cry, the sound triggering similar reactions from Kenya and Imani. Soon the room filled with the heartbreaking chorus of children trying to be brave and failing. "This is my fault," Teyana said, the weight of guilt crushing her chest. "I should never have brought you here. I should have found another way." "There wasn't another way," Eli countered fiercely. "You kept your family together. You did what any good mother would do." The megaphone blared again, 20 minutes remaining before forced evacuation. Darius clutched the few books he'd claimed from the old playroom, his escape into imagination now just physical objects weighing down his small backpack. "I thought this was our home now," he said, confusion and betrayal etched on his face. "I'm sorry, baby," Teyana answered, the words woefully inadequate. "Sometimes even castles fall." The twins huddled together, Jaden's arm protectively around Jayla's shoulders. Amara methodically packed and repacked her bag, attempting to impose order on uncontrollable chaos. Malik stood tall, trying so hard to be the man of the family, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. Teyana felt something inside her crumbling, the careful walls she'd built to contain her desperation, her rage at a system that offered no mercy, her terror of failing the 8 souls who depended on her. 3 weeks of hope dissolved like sugar in rain, leaving nothing but the bitter taste of yet another loss. Outside, the bulldozer's engine revved impatiently. Inside, 8 children looked to their mother for salvation she couldn't provide. 10 minutes remaining, the megaphone announced. Teyana fell to her knees, a prayer or a curse trapped behind her clenched teeth. After everything, after job loss, eviction, homelessness, finding and rebuilding this sanctuary, they were back where they started. Nowhere to go. No future to believe in. No miracle waiting to save them. Then Eli's phone rang. Eli's phone vibrated in his hand, Eric's name flashing on the screen. He answered quickly, his face transitioning from hope to confusion to grim determination as he listened. 5 minutes remaining, the megaphone announced outside. "We need to talk to them," Eli said, ending the call and turning to Teyana. "Eric says there's been a procedural error. The demolition wasn't properly authorized. We might have grounds to stop this, but we need to buy time." Teyana looked at her children, 8 faces painted with fear, watching their world collapse for the second time in a month. Something inside her hardened, like metal forged in fire. "Stay here," she instructed, straightening her shoulders. "All of you." Before anyone could protest, she marched to the front door and flung it open, stepping outside to face the small army arrayed against her family. "This is our home," she announced, her voice carrying across the startled crowd of workers and officials. "You can't tear it down." A man in an expensive suit stepped forward, clipboard in hand, face impassive. "Ma'am, this building is city property scheduled for emergency demolition. You're trespassing, and you need to vacate immediately." Have you ever reached the moment where fear transforms into something stronger? When losing everything makes you fearless because there's nothing left to lose. "My name is Teyana Hensley," she declared, emphasizing her surname. "This building was founded by my grandmother, Margaret Hensley. It was created to shelter mothers and children in crisis. That's exactly what it's doing now." The official's expression didn't change. Ownership reverted to the city years ago when the Hensley Foundation disbanded. "Your family connection is irrelevant." "Is it?" Teyana challenged, stepping closer. "Is it irrelevant that you're about to make 8 children homeless? Is it irrelevant that the system that should protect them has failed at every turn? Is it irrelevant that we have nowhere else to go?" Her voice broke on the last words, tears streaming freely down her face, but she didn't back down. Behind her, Eli emerged from the building, positioning himself at her side, not stepping in front of her, not taking over, just standing with her in silent support. "The law is clear," the official stated, though with slightly less conviction. "This structure is unsafe." "We've repaired it," Eli interjected. "I'm a licensed contractor. The immediate safety issues have been addressed." "That's not." "Look at them," Teyana interrupted, gesturing toward the doorway where her children now stood watching, despite her instructions to stay inside. "Look at their faces. Are you going to be the one to tell them they have to sleep on the street tonight? Are you going to be the one who tears down the only safe place they've found?" The workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The police officers shifted their weight. No one made eye contact with the children. "I lost my job," Teyana continued, desperation giving her words a raw power that cut through official procedures and bureaucratic barriers. "I was evicted. The shelters were full. I did everything I was supposed to do, followed every rule, and the system still left us with nothing. This building with my family's name on it, was the only door that opened." Silence fell over the scene. Even the bulldozer's engine seemed to quiet in respect. "Please," Teyana whispered, dropping to her knees on the concrete, pride abandoned in favor of her children's welfare. "Please don't take this from us too." The official checked his watch, visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to bend. "I'm sorry. We have our orders." Eli stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Then arrest me first," he challenged. "Because I'm not leaving, and I'm not letting you tear this building down with them inside." Inside the doorway, Malik moved to join them, followed by Zion, then Amara, a unified front of defiance. 3 minutes remaining, announced a police officer, his voice less certain than before. Teyana remained on her knees, but now her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Not begging for mercy from the officials who had shown none, but appealing to a higher authority, for strength, for a miracle, for any intervention that might save her family from this final cruelty. "If you do this," she said finally, eyes opening to lock with the lead official's gaze, "I want your name. I want everyone's name. I want the world to know who destroyed a shelter for 8 innocent children when there was nowhere else for them to go." The official flinched, the first crack in his professional armor. He glanced at the assembled workers, the police, the media van that had just pulled up at the edge of the scene. 1 minute, came the announcement, though no one moved to enforce it. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "Hold everything. Stop the demolition." A man pushed his way through the workers, waving a folder above his head, moving with the urgency of someone carrying salvation. "I have documents the city needs to see before this goes any further," he announced, breathing hard from running. The official turned, irritation clear on his face. "And who exactly are you?" The man straightened his tie, extending a business card with a practiced motion. "Thomas Hensley, attorney at law. Margaret Hensley was my great-aunt. And I believe this woman is my cousin." Dawn had barely broken when Eli's truck screeched to a halt outside the Hensley Center. The demolition confrontation had stretched into hours of tense negotiation the previous day, ending in a temporary stay, just 24 hours for Thomas Hensley to produce documentation supporting his claims about the building's ownership. Teyana rushed to the door at the sound of Eli's urgent knocking, her hair still disheveled from another sleepless night. The children remained asleep, exhausted from yesterday's emotional ordeal. "You need to see this," Eli said breathlessly, clutching a worn leather folder to his chest. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but blazed with an intensity that made Teyana's heart race. "I've been up all night. Walter called me, he had something hidden away all these years." Inside, he spread the folder's contents across their makeshift dining table, yellowed documents, old photographs, newspaper clippings. Walter was more than just maintenance, Eli explained, arranging the papers with trembling hands. He was Margaret Hensley's right-hand man. Her confidant. And apparently, her secret keeper. Teyana picked up a photograph, her grandmother standing proudly before the newly opened center, Walter beside her, decades younger but unmistakable. "Have you ever discovered a piece of your own history that suddenly makes sense of your present? A hidden thread connecting past to future that was invisibly guiding you all along?" "The city inspector will be here at 8, Teyana said, glancing nervously at the clock. "Thomas said he'd try to get here earlier, but—" "Thomas doesn't have these," Eli interrupted, tapping a sealed envelope with Margaret Hensley's elegant script across the front. "According to Walter, she left specific instructions. This was to be opened only in the event the center faced demolition. He kept it safe all these years." The envelope contained a document unlike the others, not yellowed with age but preserved in protective plastic, its legal language dense but unmistakable in its intent. "It's a trust document," Eli explained, his voice quivering with suppressed excitement. "Margaret Hensley never turned the building over to the city. She created a private trust with very specific conditions." Before Teyana could process this information, a sharp knock announced the inspector's early arrival. Thomas Hensley stood beside him on the doorstep, his lawyer's briefcase in hand, his expression carefully neutral. "The city has graciously agreed to review additional documentation," Thomas explained as they entered, his tone suggesting that graciousness had required significant legal pressure. The city inspector, not the same official from yesterday, but a higher-ranking woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, surveyed the building's interior with professional detachment. "I understand you've made improvements," she noted, taking in the repairs, the clean spaces, the evidence of 9 lives being rebuilt within these walls. "Yes," Teyana answered simply. "It's our home now." "Legally, it cannot be," the inspector countered, though without hostility. "Unless Mr. Hensley's documentation proves otherwise." Thomas began presenting his arguments, convoluted explanations about improperly filed transfers, bureaucratic oversights, potential procedural errors in the city's acquisition of the property. The inspector listened with practiced patience, occasionally making notes, her expression revealing nothing. Then Eli stepped forward, placing Walter's sealed envelope before her. "You should see this before making any decision." Thomas frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption of his carefully constructed legal argument. "What is this?" "The truth," Eli said, nodding encouragingly to Teyana. "Tell them." Teyana's hands shook as she lifted the document. "My grandmother, Margaret Hensley, left specific instructions about this building. It was never meant to become city property." The inspector adjusted her glasses, examining the trust document with professional scrutiny. According to this, she read aloud, her voice gradually shifting from skepticism to surprise, the Hensley Community Resource Center was placed in an irrevocable trust with a unique reversionary clause. In the event the center ceased operations for a period exceeding 2 years, ownership would not revert to the city, but to... She looked up, meeting Teyana's eyes directly for the first time. "To the direct female descendants of Margaret Hensley, with the express purpose of continuing the center's original mission of providing shelter to mothers and children in crisis." The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. "This building," the inspector said slowly, "legally belongs to you." Thomas's expression transformed from confusion to delighted disbelief as he reviewed the document. This changes everything. Outside, the demolition crew waited, engines idling, unaware that their target had just undergone a miraculous transformation from condemned city property to Teyana Hensley's rightful inheritance. "There's something else," Eli said, reaching for one final document in the folder. Something no one knew about until now. The room fell silent as Eli carefully unfolded the final document, not a legal paper like the trust, but a handwritten letter on personal stationery, the ink faded but still legible. Dated nearly 50 years earlier, it bore Margaret Hensley's elegant signature at the bottom. "To my granddaughter," Eli read aloud, his voice softening with each word. "If you are reading this, it means the center is in danger, and Walter has fulfilled his promise to protect both the building and this letter until the moment of greatest need." Teyana's hand flew to her mouth, tears already forming. A letter written decades ago, addressed to her specifically, as if Margaret had somehow known this moment would come. "I don't know your name yet," the letter continued. "You may not even be born as I write this. But I know you exist in the future, carrying our family's strength, our family's purpose, our family's heart." The children had awakened, drawn by the voices and the tension vibrating through their home. They gathered silently in the doorway, witnessing their mother's transformation as she listened to her grandmother's words reaching across time. "I built this center because I once stood where you may be standing now, alone, with children to protect, and nowhere to turn. When my husband died in Vietnam, leaving me with 6 children and no support, I learned how quickly the world turns its back on women in crisis. What echoes of your ancestors live in your blood? What battles did they fight so you wouldn't have to? And which ones are you still fighting, generation after generation?" Thomas stepped closer, his lawyer's detachment cracking as he recognized his own family history woven into the narrative. The city inspector stood motionless, transfixed by the intimate window into a stranger's life. "I made a vow then," Eli continued reading, "that no woman in our family would ever sleep on the streets with her children. This building is your birthright, your sanctuary, your responsibility. If it has fallen silent, it is waiting for your voice to revive its purpose." Teyana's tears fell freely now, landing on the worn floorboards her grandmother had once walked upon. The coincidences that had seemed random, finding this specific building on the night of their eviction, the name above the door, the strange sense of belonging, suddenly revealed themselves as something more profound. Something like destiny. "The Hensley women have always been builders," the letter proclaimed. "We build homes from ruins. We build families from fragments. We build futures from broken promises. This center is not just bricks and mortar, it is the physical manifestation of our family's covenant with those who come after us." Malik moved to stand beside his mother, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. One by one, her children gathered around her, drawn by the invisible thread connecting them to a woman they'd never met but whose blood ran through their veins. "If this building ever falls silent," Eli read, his voice catching slightly, "it shall return to my bloodline. It was built so no mother in our family would ever sleep on the streets. But it exists to ensure no mother in our community suffers that fate either." The inspector cleared her throat, clearly moved despite her professional demeanor. "This confirms the trust document. The building legally belongs to Ms. Hensley." "It's more than that," Thomas added, legal mind already calculating possibilities. "It establishes historical precedent for the center's purpose. We could apply for historical designation, tax-exempt status as a continuation of the original mission." He fell silent as Teyana stepped forward, taking the letter from Eli's hands to read the final lines herself. "This center bears our name because Hensley women keep their promises," she read, voice strengthening with each word. "We stand when others fall. We open doors when others build walls. We remember what it means to be homeless, hopeless, and helpless, and we never turn away from those still trapped in that darkness." She looked up, meeting the eyes of each person in the room before settling her gaze on her children, 8 faces watching her with pride, with wonder, with the sudden recognition that they were part of something larger than themselves. When the world says no, Teyana finished reading, the Hensley women say yes. That is our legacy. That is your inheritance. That is your responsibility now. As she folded the letter, Imani tugged at her sleeve, pointing to a single line at the bottom they had missed, a postscript added in shakier handwriting, as if written years after the original letter. P.S. When you find him, the right man won't walk away. He'll help you rebuild. The city inspector closed Margaret Hensley's letter with careful reverence, her bureaucratic armor visibly softening in the face of such intimate history. She cleared her throat and straightened, but her eyes had changed, no longer clinical and detached, but seeing the human story behind the paperwork. This changes everything, she said, addressing Teyana directly. The demolition order was based on the premise that this was abandoned city property. Clearly, it is not. Outside, the demolition crew remained, engines idling, unaware that their target had just undergone a miraculous transformation from condemned building to family legacy. I need to make some calls, the inspector continued, already dialing on her phone. She stepped aside, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone with authority to halt the proceedings. Thomas was already immersed in the trust document, legal mind calculating possibilities. This is extraordinary, he murmured. The trust is ironclad. No wonder the city's ownership claims never fully processed. They were legally invalid from the start. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when justice finally prevails? When the universe seems to right itself after a long period of wrongness? Teyana stood taller than she had in weeks, perhaps years. The weight that had pressed her shoulders down, single motherhood, poverty, unemployment, homelessness, hadn't disappeared, but somehow it had redistributed. She was no longer carrying it alone. This building was waiting for us, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. It knew we would come. The inspector returned, phone still in hand. I've spoken with the department head. The demolition is officially cancelled pending full review of ownership documentation. A collective exhale seemed to move through the room. The children, who had been holding themselves so carefully still, suddenly burst with released tension. We get to stay? Kenya asked, her small voice carrying the hope of all of them. Yes, Teyana answered with newfound authority. This is our home. Our inheritance. Our responsibility. The inspector nodded, already switching to practical matters. You'll need to complete proper registration paperwork. The building will require inspection and certification before it can officially function as a residence or community center again. We understand, Teyana said, no longer intimidated by official procedures and requirements. Where once she would have seen insurmountable obstacles, she now saw merely steps on a path that was clearly meant for her. The inspector gestured toward the windows. I'll inform the demolition crew they're dismissed. Mr. Hensley, if you could accompany me to complete the necessary documentation to formally halt proceedings. Thomas gathered his papers, pausing to squeeze Teyana's shoulder before following the inspector outside. As the news spread through the building, the children's reactions transformed from stunned disbelief to cautious celebration. Jayla and Jaden performed an impromptu dance. Darius announced he would write a book about their adventure. Amara quietly began organizing the scattered papers into neat piles, already thinking of the future. Mom. Malik approached, the worry lines that had aged his young face beginning to smooth. Is it really over? Can we really stay? Yes, Teyana answered, certainty filling her voice. This is where we belong. From outside came the sound of engines starting, not approaching, but departing. Through the window, they watched the bulldozer being loaded back onto its trailer, the workers packing up equipment that would not, after all, be destroying their home. Zion, who had maintained his protective shell of anger throughout their ordeal, finally let his guard down. Grandma Margaret knew what she was doing, he said, a rare smile transforming his face. She did, Teyana agreed, pulling him into a hug that, for once, he didn't resist. Eli stood slightly apart, watching the family's celebration with quiet satisfaction. When Teyana met his eyes across the room, something unspoken passed between them: recognition, gratitude, possibility. The postscript from Margaret's letter echoed in Teyana's mind: when you find him, the right man won't walk away. He'll help you rebuild. As the last city vehicle pulled away from the curb, Walter appeared at the doorway, his weathered face creased with a knowing smile. "It's time you knew the whole truth," he said, eyes fixed on Teyana. "About Margaret. About this place. And about why your family name is on that door." The media arrived before Walter could finish explaining, a local newsvan followed by another, then another, drawn by the unlikely drama of a homeless family facing demolition, only to discover they owned the building. The human interest angle was irresistible. A single mother of 8 children, a forgotten family legacy, a last-minute reprieve from destruction. The story spread like wildfire across local stations, then regional, then national. "Ms. Hensley, how does it feel to discover your grandmother left you this building?" a reporter called out, microphone extended as Teyana stepped outside to address the growing crowd. "Like coming home," she answered simply, her natural dignity and quiet strength making for compelling television. "Like finding a missing piece of myself." The children watched wide-eyed as their mother transformed before cameras, not rehearsed or polished, but authentic in a way that resonated with viewers. By evening, the first volunteers arrived, offering help with repairs. By the next morning, donations began appearing on the doorstep: furniture, appliances, clothing, food. Have you ever witnessed how quickly humanity can mobilize around genuine need once they see it clearly? How quickly abundance can replace scarcity when people open their hearts. "I never imagined this," Teyana confessed to Eli as they sorted through another truckload of donations a week later. "I was just trying to survive, to keep my children safe. Now all this." The "all this" she referenced was the stunning transformation occurring around them. Local contractors volunteered weekends to bring the building up to code. A restaurant chain provided commercial kitchen equipment. Interior designers offered services to create proper living quarters in one section while renovating the main areas as community spaces. Thomas, leveraging his legal connections, fast-tracked the paperwork to re-establish the Hensley Center as a non-profit organization with Teyana as director. Walter shared invaluable historical records about the center's original operations, recreating programs Margaret had designed decades earlier. "Your grandmother built this place to be more than just a shelter," Walter explained as they uncovered old filing cabinets filled with program materials. "It was meant to be a launching pad. A place where women could rebuild their lives, not just survive." The concept resonated deeply with Teyana, who had spent years merely surviving. Now, surrounded by support and purpose, she began to envision something greater, not just for herself and her children, but for others like them. "We should have a job training program," she suggested during a planning meeting, surprising herself with her confidence. "And childcare, so mothers can go to interviews. And financial literacy classes." Eli watched her with undisguised admiration as she sketched out ideas, her natural leadership emerging from the shell of crisis and exhaustion that had contained it. The children, too, found new purpose in the center's revival. Malik organized a teen volunteer group that became the backbone of the renovation efforts. Zion discovered an aptitude for electrical work, apprenticing with professionals who recognized his talent. Amara created a lending library from donated books, while the twins established a play area for children of future residents. 1 month after the averted demolition, the sign above the entrance was restored to its original glory, the Hensley Center for Women and Families, with a new tagline beneath, "Building Futures from Broken Pieces." "I had a job before," Teyana told a reporter during a follow-up story. "Now I have a calling." The reporter, touched by the transformation, asked the question viewers had been wondering: what about the father of your children? Has he seen what you've accomplished? Teyana hesitated, the question reopening wounds still tender despite her newfound strength. Before she could respond, Eli stepped forward, instinctively placing himself between her and potential pain. "Some men walk away from responsibility," he said, eyes meeting Teyana's with quiet intensity. Others recognize when they've been given a gift worth staying for. That evening, as final preparations were underway for the official reopening ceremony, Teyana found herself alone in what had become her office, the same space where Margaret had once directed the center's operations decades earlier. The phone on her desk rang, a number she didn't recognize but answered automatically. Hensley Center, she said, the words feeling right on her tongue. A long pause followed, then a male voice she hadn't heard in 3 years. Teyana? It's Tyrell. I saw you on the news. Tyrell's call had come the day before the grand reopening ceremony, a painful echo from the past that threatened to destabilize Teyana's hard-won equilibrium. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of raising their children alone, 3 years of carrying the weight he had abandoned, his voice on the phone had been both familiar and foreign. I'm not interested, she had told him after hearing his stumbling explanation, his claims of regret, his sudden desire to reconnect now that she was on television. My children deserve consistency. Not someone who leaves when things get hard and returns when they look easy. Now, standing before the gathered crowd on reopening day, Teyana felt lighter for having closed that door, not with anger, but with clarity. The ceremonial ribbon stretched across the Hensley Center's freshly painted entrance, a tangible barrier between past and future waiting to be cut. I never expected to be here, Teyana began, her voice steady despite the sea of faces watching her. 2 months ago, I was employed, housed, and struggling quietly to make ends meet. Then in a single day, I lost my job, our home, and nearly lost hope. The crowd, a mix of volunteers, donors, media, city officials, and curious neighbors, listened in reverent silence. Eli stood to her right, the children lined up beside her, each wearing clothes donated by well-wishers but standing with newfound dignity. Have you ever stood at the threshold between your past and future, recognizing the exact moment when your life's purpose revealed itself? When survival transformed into something greater? My grandmother Margaret built this center 50 years ago because she understood what it meant to be a mother with nowhere to turn, Teyana continued. I never knew her. Never heard her story until I found myself living it, homeless with 8 children, desperate for just one open door. She gestured toward the building behind her, no longer an abandoned shell but a vibrant testament to what community effort could achieve. New windows gleamed in the sunlight. Fresh paint covered the exterior. The sign above the door proudly proclaimed its identity and purpose. We came here by chance, she said, her voice catching slightly. Or at least that's what I thought. Now I understand it was inheritance. Legacy. The invisible thread of purpose that connects generations of women who refuse to be broken by circumstance. Thomas Hensley nodded from the front row, where he sat with the city inspector who had ultimately become their strongest advocate. Walter stood nearby, pride evident in his weathered features. The Hensley Center will once again serve its original mission, Teyana explained. Providing emergency housing for mothers and children in crisis. Offering job training, childcare, financial education, and most importantly, a community that understands starting over is not the same as giving up. Applause rippled through the crowd. A woman toward the back wiped tears from her eyes, perhaps recognizing her own story in Teyana's words, perhaps seeing a possibility she hadn't dared imagine for herself. My family found shelter here when we had nowhere else to go, Teyana continued. Now we're making room for others who need the same chance we were given. As she lifted the ceremonial scissors, Eli stepped closer, his hand briefly touching her back in silent support. Not possessive, not presumptive, just present, the steadying force he had become in her life. Some people walk away, Teyana said, meeting his eyes with newfound confidence. Others help you rebuild. Today, we're rebuilding more than just a building. We're rebuilding lives. The ribbon parted with a satisfying snip, releasing a cheer from the assembled crowd. Kenya and Imani jumped up and down in excitement. The older children beamed with pride. Even Zion, normally so guarded, stood tall beside his siblings, a tentative smile breaking through his protective shell. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic than the exterior suggested. The main hall had been converted into a multipurpose space. Rooms that once housed Teyana's family now stood ready for new occupants. The kitchen gleamed with donated equipment, and the childcare area brimmed with toys and books. As visitors poured in to tour the facility, Teyana found herself momentarily alone at the entrance, watching the dream materialize around her. From homeless to homeowner. From jobless to director. From desperate survivor to community leader. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, not a burden this time, but a mantle she was ready to wear. From behind her came a small voice, unexpected and disbelieving. "Mommy? Is that Daddy?" It wasn't Tyrell. Just someone who resembled him, standing among the crowd of visitors. The moment of confusion passed, but it left a lingering question in the air: what if he had shown up? What would Teyana have said or done differently? These thoughts drifted through her mind as evening fell over the Hensley Center. The celebration finally concluded, the last visitors departed. The family gathered in their private living quarters, now properly furnished and separated from the center's public spaces. A small apartment carved from the building's west wing, humble but infinitely better than where they had been 2 months ago. The children, exhausted from the day's excitement, settled into their evening routines with the comfortable rhythms of home. "We did it," Eli said quietly, helping Teyana collect abandoned glasses from various surfaces. Not, "you did it," but, "we," a simple word that carried the weight of partnership, of shared purpose, of future possibility. She nodded, too emotionally drained for words but grateful for his steady presence. He understood without explanation, giving her the silence she needed after a day of speeches and interviews and constant interaction. How do we measure the distance between our lowest moments and the heights we eventually reach? Between sleeping on rain-soaked streets and cutting ribbons on buildings that bear our name? Later, as moonlight filtered through newly installed curtains, Imani approached Teyana with paintbrushes and paper in hand. At 3 years old, she had experienced homelessness and found home again without fully understanding either, yet something in her seemed to grasp the significance of this day. "Mama, can I paint something on the wall?" she asked, her small face serious with creative purpose. "What do you want to paint, baby?" Teyana asked, kneeling to her daughter's level. Imani's answer came without hesitation: a house that never goes away. The simple wisdom of children, cutting through complexity to the heart of what matters. Teyana laughed through sudden tears, gathering her youngest into a fierce hug. "Yeah, baby," she whispered. "Make it bright." Instead of the wall, they found a large canvas among the art supplies donated for the center's programs. Teyana set it up in the corner of their living room, and one by one, the family gathered around. Even the older children, normally too cool for such activities, added their contributions, Malik painting sturdy foundation lines, Zion adding electrical fixtures in careful detail, Amara lettering their family name across the top. Together, they created not just a house but a story, their journey from devastation to redemption, from homelessness to inheritance, from desperation to purpose. The paint-smeared faces of her children reflected something Teyana hadn't seen in far too long: security, belonging, joy. When the masterpiece was complete, they hung it in the center's main hallway, the first piece of art in what would become a gallery of hope, a visual testimony to transformation. Standing before it, arm in arm with her children, Teyana finally felt the full circle of their journey. 2 months ago, she had stared at an eviction notice, her world collapsing around her. Tonight, she stood as director of a center dedicated to preventing that same fate for other mothers, other children. Sometimes, she said softly, God doesn't open doors. Sometimes, Malik finished, wisdom beyond his 14 years, he makes you rebuild them. From the doorway, Eli watched, not inserting himself into this family moment but witnessing it with quiet reverence. When Teyana met his eyes across the room, something settled between them, not a conclusion but a beginning, not a rescue but a partnership, not perfect but perfectly right. The journey from crisis to calling rarely follows a straight line. It zigzags through heartbreak and hope, through rain-soaked nights and sun-drenched mornings, through doors that close and others that unexpectedly open. Some stories deserve more than passing attention, they deserve to be shared, to echo through lives beyond their telling, to remind us that our darkest chapters often precede our most important work. Because sometimes, the buildings that shelter us bear our names for reasons we don't yet understand. Sometimes, our greatest inheritance isn't what we're given, but what we rebuild from ruins. As night settled over the Hensley Center, Teyana stood at the window, watching the moonlight silvering the neighborhood that had become home in the truest sense. Behind her, her children slept peacefully. Before her stretched a future built on legacy, on purpose, on the unbreakable foundation of a mother's love. "Thank you, Margaret," she whispered to her grandmother across time. "I'll keep the door open."